Some summing up, I just wanted to pull all the key points together into a set of handy slides for people to refer to if they don't want to wade through the other 150 that we've just been through. Okay? We've got our 5 key design questions. When you're containerizing anything, you need to answer these 5 questions. You don't want the same behavior in dev as well as test and live. Your dev environment wants to be optimized for you as a developer, or if you're building images for other people, them as developers. You don't want to get in their way. If you get in their way, at the very least, you're costing time and money. And in this economy, that's painful. At the worst cases, they'll go and use something else because they will be too much in the way. You want to make it easy for everybody. But test and production images, that's what you ship, and they're optimized to be used in anger. These images are layered. It's like layers of sedimentary rock, and we can build up a stack of those, and at the bottom of your stack, make them nice and generic and get more and more specific and tailored as you go up. That's the stack I use. Other stacks, as they say, are available. It doesn't matter how you organize things. Do what suits you. Don't just copy me. If you do take this approach, your base layer, last thing you want to do is be having to change things further up the stack for what you've done in your base layer. Because at that point, you're maintaining things in 2 places. Get it right in your base layer. Listen to your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, change it. Nothing wrong with that at all. We have to have some mount points, so standardize them. These are the 4 I use. They're just me. You'll see /data/logs, and to a large extent /config is used in a lot of public images. You'll see those. I doubt you'll see /workspace because I don't think people are using images in the way I do for dev and then test and live. But whatever you want, whatever you do, standardize them. Just makes life easier. We can have this startup script, this bootstrap script that runs when your container starts, edits your files with sed, and then it fires off supervisor afterwards. Once things are running, try not to write to that file system inside your container. Because if you do, nasty things happen. And then we've got the 2 rules of thumb about co-location and separation. If you'd never run them, if you always run things on the same server, even at scale, put them in the same container. If you would split them up in your container straight away. We talked about memcache earlier. Memcache is a great example because you might co-locate that with your app in the physical world. But if you're up in the cloud, you might not have your own memcache server. You might use Amazon's, for example, with Elasticache. So they're dealing with all the maintenance. And if that's in a separate container, in dev, you can have your own copy of memcache. And then in production, you just don't have a memcache container. You just configure things to use Apache's hosted services for you. So it's another reason why you'd split things up. Please remember this. This is if you only take this one away, it's still worth it. And it's definitely still getting a red slide. It's so important, this. Every team I've worked with has found that one out the hard way. They have been through this. They've lived this. They've gone, oh, it's just like virtual machines, but free. No runtime performance costs, no resource problems with RAM, etc. We'll just lift and shift. And then you lose your data. So don't do that. Another dodgy QR code. That goes to my images so you can see what I do. Thank you all very much. You've been very patient and a good audience. What do you think then? Yeah? Was it worth coming?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you haven't used Docker, some of this may only make sense further down the road once you've started experimenting with it for yourselves. And so you might want to just bookmark these slides for another day. You might find you get more use out of it that way. I would love to hear your experiences down the road. If you start containerizing stuff and you start living with the results of that, do get in touch and let me know. I want to hear not only how my advice stands up for other people, but what approaches you find. There will be other approaches that are just as valid. Yeah. One of the reasons Docker is so popular at the end of the day is because it's so flexible. It makes it easy to get images in people's hands. And other than that, it pretty much gets out of the way, to be honest. It's not very opinionated. The documentation gives very strong advice and guidance, and you've heard me say I don't agree with all of it. But the nice thing is the underlying technology doesn't care. And you can always go old school, remove Docker and use the underlying Linux container capability directly. You'll see people online have done that. So that's another option as well for you. In my Nottingham thing, I said I'd been using Docker about 2 years and I wouldn't go back. I moved back to using Linux full time to use Docker because that's where Docker works the best by a mile. And it was worth it for me. The sheer amount of productivity I got and the amount of stuff I could do on a single machine, for me, it was more than worth it. I wouldn't go back to Vagrant and VirtualBox. I really wouldn't. They were great tools in their time. Before Docker came along, they were the best thing out there, and they made development environments at scale so easy. We used them at DataSift, where I was for a while, for all our developers, and they were fantastic for that, especially as we had mixed platforms. Some of us ran Mac, some of us ran Linux, some of us ran both. But we had the same dev environments everywhere. But now Docker's come along, it's so much better for that. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Please.
So the place where I'm working,
Yeah.
they're using Linux containers.
Okay.
Not well, in the part that I'm talking about, not Docker.
Sure.
And so we're currently using Ansible to build the container and stuff.
Okay.
So, LXC create,
Yeah.
and go from there and build it up. So and it shares a lot of similarities with Docker. So
Yeah.
they're both containers and the overlay interface, all that kind of stuff. Does Docker, what Docker adds, is that the sort of Docker file configuration of the layers and building these images? Is that what Docker is, like its value, or is there other stuff as well?
Its main value is in that distribution. And the other fact is this whole separation of images and containers. So with I haven't used the underlying APIs in Anger, I've only read about it, so my information may be wrong. My understanding is you basically you've got a file system as an image, you mount it via something like a loopback file system, the loopback mechanism in Linux, and then when your container runs, it's writing effectively to the image. There's no separation of image file system and container file system, to the best of my knowledge. You can do that, because that's what Docker does by putting this copy on write file system in place. But by default, it's just like a virtual machine. When you boot it, you're writing to that VBox you downloaded. You're not writing to a copy of it. So you've got all the persistence, etc., but you don't have that ability to scale up. You would have to create multiple copies of that underlying file system in order to scale up that your container's building. That's my understanding. So you get some benefits by that approach instead of Docker, but you lose some of the ease. Might not be an issue for many people. What Docker does, first of all, is make it easy for me I can build an image and get it into your hands very easily. You can run 10 copies of it very easily. And via the Docker file, you can build something in 10, 20 lines instead of how much it takes with Ansible and how much it takes to maintain something built in Ansible. I used to use Ansible. I was one of the first adopters of it in the UK. I stopped using it, Christ, what was that, 4+ years ago? Because I still prefer Ansible to the alternatives, but I was finding the maintenance overhead was such a problem for me. And then with Docker files, you don't have that maintenance overhead. I spend so little maintaining these images. Probably don't spend enough, if anything. You'll see these images on Docker Hub are 4 months old, so I need to rebuild them just to make sure they've got the latest Ubuntu security updates. It's just that my Jenkins box that does this build is switched off most of the time to save energy. That's all. I just need to boot it up and let it do a fresh build. But I have to spend so little time on it. And that Docker file allows me to do that. And also this approach where I've got things separated out to different things as well. I don't find I'm tripping over myself, whereas beforehand, I actually used Packer to build my images previously rather than using Ansible to build images. And because Packer will download an ISO for you. It's really great for that. But I would find I'd spend so much time, because I'd want different flavors of them. I'd spend so much time going to each one to adjust them. And that multiplied because I was serving lots of different people. Your circumstances might be different. So Docker may not help as much. But as your team grows and scales, from the conversation we had earlier, at that point, you're going to want to put something in the hands of new people. Docker makes that incredibly easy. It really does. You've still got to make sure they can run Docker things on their computer. You've got to set all that up. And you've got to make sure, if it needs databases downloading, etc., you've still got to help people with that. Docker's not 100% a distribution mechanism for that, but it solves the software side of it. And once you're used to it, you don't think about it at all. Does that
As a follow-up,
Sure.
do you know if there's been any comparisons done between, say, libvirt running a container over Docker running a container, and if there's, one's better than the other?
I don't know, I'm sorry, I've not looked into it at all.
It might be that Docker uses libvirt.
It's so long since I looked at libvirt, I couldn't tell you exactly what its roles and responsibilities are anymore, I'm afraid, so I can't answer that. I just don't know. Any more questions from anybody?
So I've got a question. What happens if you start up a Docker container on a Mac or Windows? Does it start a VM?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, I can't speak about Windows. It's 2006 was the last time I used Windows, thankfully.
I can speak about Windows.
Awesome. Awesome. Sorry?
Windows, unless you have Windows 10 Professional, it will start a VM. If you have Windows 10 Professional, you can run a Windows-based container. You still cannot run a Linux-based VM. I don't know about Mac.
Mac starts a VM in the background,
It does.
and that causes a lot of... it works on Mac, but it doesn't perform as well.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it runs all your containers in that one virtual machine. And just like with Vagrant and VBox, you have to give it fixed resources when it starts, fixed amount of RAM, fixed amount of CPU. It's not very flexible. Apple, it's not Docker's fault. Docker's working around the fact that Apple needed to get their finger out and embrace this stuff properly. Microsoft are going that way with Windows 10 Professional and the Ubuntu subsystem. I haven't used it in anger, so I don't know how well it hangs together. But that's, that was built to run Android apps.
I don't know if you can run Docker container in the Ubuntu subsystem on Windows.
Wouldn't know.
I'll try.
But that subsystem was built to run Android apps on Microsoft Windows. So it mimics certainly a lot of the Linux kernel cores. It may not mimic all of them, but it mimics a lot of them. So it might have support for that, or they may extend it to do that in the future. That would be the sensible thing to do, because you don't want these virtual machines. The moment there's a virtual machine in the background, like there is on Mac, you have lost the runtime benefits. You've still got all these distribution benefits, but the fact that, this machine is the most powerful Mac they sell. My Linux box is an Ultrabook, 2 cores. It's not cheap because it's a Lenovo, but it's possibly a quarter of the power of this. Docker on that Ultrabook smokes this machine every time. I don't even run Docker on here, it's so painful by comparison, because it's running in a virtual machine and all that overhead and all that performance loss, and the fact that when I move away from those images, I've lost half my Mac to this virtual machine anyway, so everything else runs slow as well. I don't get any benefits. For me, it's better off having 2 laptops. And my little Ultrabook just buries this thing, despite how powerful it actually is. So virtual machines, and it's horrible. That's why I moved to Linux. Docker on Linux, everything runs native, and the cost is almost zero in terms of resources. It's really nice. And you don't get any of the weird bugs. It works the best as well, because they're not having to work around the limitations of the other operating systems.